Hello, time for a Man in Great book review. Today's book is 101 People Who Made the USA by Christopher Townley, published in 2024. It's 110 pages. This is an ebook only publication, and it's part of a series called 101 People, and it includes other books in the series include biographies of people from the UK, Canada, Spain, Norway, and Ireland. This book, as the name implies, is a list of short one-page biographies of 101 famous Americans, and they're arranged in chronological order, beginning with Arlington Springs Man. The skeletal remains of, in 1959, the skeletal remains of a man was found on Santa Rosa Island, a little island off the coast of California, and they were dated to 13,000 years ago. So Arlington Springs Man is the oldest American known. His remains are the oldest of Americans. So it begins with Arlington Springs Man, and it ends with President Ronald Reagan. And so these are all in chronological order from Arlington Springs Man to Ronald Reagan, and each one is a page long. So, let me do the positives about this book first. If you're a person who wants to kind of bone up or brush up on your U.S. history, but you're intimidated by reading a 500-page American history book, and you don't want to wade through a whole bunch of Wikipedia articles, well, this gives you little capsule summaries of some famous people and the events that they were involved in, and they're in chronological order. So the early ones include explorers like De Soto and Walter Raleigh and Christopher Columbus and so forth, and then they go all the way into the mid 20th century, or mid to late 20th century. And so it's a good way to kind of brush up on U.S. history. Each biography is one page. It takes maybe 30 or 45 seconds to read. They also have, at the end of some of them, they have little one sentence additions concerning other people. For example, there's a biography of Thomas Edison, and at the bottom it mentions Nikola Tesla. Of course, they were big rivals, and so that way you can look that up. So it's a good way to kind of brush up on history if you don't want to read a long history book. And if you're someone who likes to read it, if you're stuck in traffic or you're commuting, you can read several of these real quickly. You can read several of them at night if you're going to bed, and because they're little self-contained biographies, you don't have to go back and try to remember what you read the night before. So that's the good part. There are some questionable parts about this. Anytime you have a list of people or things, like top 10 movies or whatever, there's always going to be some disputes. And of course, there's some here. A lot of them are obvious. Obviously, Martin Luther King belongs on here, and Franklin Roosevelt, people like that. But there are some that I really question. Like, for example, Amelia Earhart is on here, but not Charles Lindbergh. Now, Amelia Earhart is only famous because she got lost flying around the Pacific and disappeared. No one knows what happened to her, and that's why she's famous. She wasn't a particularly great aviator compared to a lot of the others. And Charles Lindbergh was not only an important aviator, he was an important political figure. In the 1930s, he was really the leader of the proto-fascist, isolationist political movement, the America First movement, as it was called. And he was really the leader of the American isolationists, and he was very sympathetic to Hitler. And in fact, until the World War II began, until Pearl Harbor attack, he was one of the most popular political figures in the country. And then years later, at the end of his life, Lindbergh became one of the prominent early leaders in what we now call the environmentalist movement. So he certainly belongs on here rather than Earhart. Another head scratcher is William McKinley. President William McKinley, what's he doing on here? The only really thing he's famous for is being shot, being assassinated when he went to a World's Fair. I don't know why he was put on here. And then there's some others like John Steinbeck, who is mentioned, gets a biography instead of William Faulkner. Steinbeck was once, after Steinbeck won the Nobel Prize for Literature, a journalist actually asked him, do you think you really deserve this prize? And Steinbeck said, frankly, no. So even Steinbeck didn't believe that he was worthy of the Nobel Prize, and yet he gets mentioned rather than William Faulkner, who was a much more influential writer. So there are some questions about that. Now, on the positive side, Townley mentions a number of people who often get overlooked in histories. For example, King Kamehameha I, the Hawaiian king who united the Hawaiian Islands in the 1700s, gets a mention. A lot of Hawaiian history gets overlooked in American history books or books about American history. Hawaii's a state. Hawaii is part of the United States, and we shouldn't just forget about it, and so that's important. And there's a number of early um, Native Americans who are mentioned in here. Tecumseh and Dragging Canoe get mentioned, people who played an important role in the French and Indian War and some of the early colonial battles get mentioned. And there's a number of cultural figures. It's not just political people. There's a number of cultural figures. Mark Twain is mentioned, Babe Ruth, Walt Disney gets a biography, Elvis Presley, Orson Welles, and Marilyn Monroe. I think those are all pretty obvious things. To me, the main problem of this is the fact that it's just an arbitrary number of 101. And so once he reached 101, he just stopped, and he stopped at Ronald Reagan. And so there's nothing in here about the last 40 or 50 years of U.S. history. There's nothing in here about Barack Obama or Bill Gates or Steve Jobs or Donald Trump, the 9/11 attacks. None of that gets mentioned in here. So it just kind of comes to an abrupt halt with the presidency of Ronald Reagan. And so I think, I know it's a brand, 101 people, that's the brand, but it really does a disservice because you're missing out on a whole lot of fairly important, fairly recent history by not doing that. So I think it would have been better if they had an appendix and say, here's some other people, that are important too. But it doesn't do that. So with those limitations in mind, it's still a book that's worth reading if you want to kind of brush up on history, as I said, and you don't want to plow through a long, tedious history book. It's an interesting concept, little short biographies of people. And I think the other volumes are really interesting too, because you learn a lot about, I read the book on 101 people who made Italy, which is a fairly recent country, right? For a long time, Italy was a group of individual principalities and city-states. And so I really learned a lot about early Italian history by reading that book. So they're interesting books, very readable, and I would recommend them if you're interested in U.S. history or history of other countries. The book is 101 People Who Made the USA. The author is Christopher Townley. It's been another Man in Gray book review. Thanks for watching.